Washington is buzzing with key appointments, but deep in the Senate, a battle over basic governance is brewing. Should qualified nominees get a simple up or down vote, or face endless partisan delays? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, September 11, 2025. And yeah, the Capitol is definitely focused on some crucial new appointments coming into the Trump administration. We're seeing big names: Florida's Marco Rubio, nominated for Secretary of State, and Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, up for U.S. Attorney General. You might think, okay, experienced people, maybe a smooth path ahead.
Yeah.
Especially with one party holding the White House and Senate.
Well, what's really fascinating here is how these nominations fit into a much larger pattern, sort of an evolution in Senate confirmations. I mean, take Pam Bondi.
Yeah.
Senator Grassley, incoming Judiciary Chair, he's already praised her publicly, called her well-qualified, predicted a quick confirmation.
Okay, sounds promising for her then.
It does, but if you look at the historical data, the average process tells a bit of a different story. President Biden's nominees, for instance, they averaged 192 days for confirmation.
Wow, 192 days.
Yeah. Compare that to, say, Ronald Reagan back in the day, 69 days.
Huge difference.
It is. Even President Trump's first term, the average was climbing around 160 days. So it really raises this important question, why are these essential government jobs facing such long, often really contentious processes now?
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this. We're diving deep into the whole machinery of presidential appointments, Senate power, looking at the history and, well, what it means today. Because this isn't just politics, right? It's about how effectively our government can actually function for you, the citizen. Let's start at the beginning. The Constitution says appointments are made with the advice and consent of the Senate. Seems simple enough. But what does that phrase, advice and consent, really mean in practice, especially for judges and cabinet members?
What's fascinating truly is the tradition. Forget this, 214 years.
2 centuries.
Yeah, for 214 years, judicial nominations that came to the Senate floor, they were considered, and crucially, without the filibuster being used to block them. The filibuster, that tactic where a minority can just talk and talk to delay or block a vote, that wasn't the norm for judges.
Huh. So no filibuster on judges for that long.
Right. The precedent, the understanding, was that nominees who had majority support would get a straightforward up or down vote after the debate.
So historically, a simple majority vote was really all it took.
Yeah.
That allowed the president to get their team in place.
Precisely. The Senate mostly worked on that principle: debate it, then vote up or down. It respected the president's constitutional role, to actually appoint people. It let the executive branch function. The idea was constructive debate, sure, but then the clear decision. Not indefinite blocking by a minority. It was about letting the elected president govern.
Okay, but clearly that changed. That tradition broke down somewhere. When did things start to shift so dramatically, and what were the consequences? Because it feels like the process got, well, weaponized. Less about qualifications, more political warfare.
The sources we've looked at, they point to a pretty significant shift, particularly when certain groups, described in the material as extreme left-leaning groups, reportedly started a campaign. Their goal, according to these sources, was to plot the defeat of circuit court nominees.
Why circuit courts specifically?
Well, these groups saw a Republican president nominating judges who believed in a strict construction of the Constitution.
Meaning interpret it based on the original text.
Exactly. Often meaning a more limited government role, judicial restraint. And these groups, the sources say, wanted to reduce that conservative influence on the courts. They engaged in what a lot of senators back then started calling the politics of personal destruction, focusing on, sound bites about results or characterizations by third parties, essentially, attacks rather than a fair look at the nominee's actual record and qualifications.
And you mentioned we have specific examples of this, people who got caught in this shift. Tell us about Priscilla Owen and Miguel Estrada.
Yeah, these are really stark examples. Priscilla Owen, nominated by President George W. Bush to the Fifth Circuit. She'd served honorably, apparently, 10 years on the Texas Supreme Court. Won re-election with a massive 84% of the vote.
Okay, sounds very qualified. Bipartisan support.
Yep. The American Bar Association gave her a unanimous, well-qualified rating, support from Texas Democrats and Republicans. And despite all that, she faced 4 years of what sources call slanderous attacks from partisan groups, and crucially denied that up or down vote repeatedly, just stalled.
4 years. Just left hanging.
Effectively held hostage, yeah. Then there's Miguel Estrada, nominated for the D.C. Circuit. That's a really key court.
Often seen as a stepping stone to the Supreme Court, right?
Exactly. He also got the highest ABA rating, unanimous, top marks. But Again, sources say outside groups targeted him, called him especially dangerous. Partly, it seems, because he was Latino and didn't have a huge paper trail, making it harder to attack his record directly. So even though he clearly had the votes, 55, 56 senators supporting him on multiple tries, he couldn't get that final up or down vote.
So they couldn't actually vote against him successfully? They just stopped the vote from
But
happening?
that's the tactic. Filibustered. He eventually withdrew after 2 years stuck in that political limbo.
Wow. So these highly qualified people blocked not on merit, not because a majority opposed them, but through procedural maneuvers. It really does sound like obstruction, not advice or consent.
And it raises a big question for our justice system, doesn't it? What happens when really qualified people, people who could serve well, are just scared off from public service because the process is so brutal and unfair? Like you said, senators at the time were calling it out, complaining about the focus on sound bites and third-party characterizations, not the record. They pointed to the partisan leadership-led use of cloture votes to kill, to defeat, to assassinate these nominees.
Okay, explain cloture quickly for us.
Sure. Cloture is the vote to end a filibuster, to end the debate and force the actual vote on the nominee. You typically need 60 senators to vote for cloture.
Ah, so if you can't get 60 votes to stop the filibuster, even if 55 senators want the nominee.
The nominee stays blocked indefinitely. It effectively creates a 60-vote requirement, a supermajority, which isn't actually in the Constitution for confirming judges or officials.
Right. So faced with this kind of gridlock, this breakdown of norms, how did the Senate try to fix it to get back to actually voting?
Well, this led to talk of the constitutional option. You probably heard it called the nuclear option in the news.
Yeah, sounds dramatic. What was the idea?
The core aim was simple: restore the principle that any president's judicial nominees, regardless of party, deserve a simple up or down vote after a full debate. Proponents saw it as the Senate basically governing itself by majority rule, which aligns with Supreme Court rulings like United States v. Ballin back in 1892. That case basically said a majority can set the rules.
And the power to make rules, they argued, could be used by a majority at any time.
Exactly. It wasn't about ignoring the minority, but stopping the minority from having an absolute veto.
And it's interesting, this push wasn't about stopping debate, was it? It was about ensuring debate eventually ended with a vote.
Absolutely not shutting down debate. Look at proposals like the first fairness rule. That guaranteed up to 100 hours of debate for every nominee.
100 hours? That's a lot of time.
It's huge. More time than most Supreme Court nominees actually got debated. But crucially, after those 100 hours, you'd get the up or down vote. So proposals like that, they tried to balance really extensive debate with the basic right of the majority to actually make a decision, to end what they saw as unprecedented obstruction and get back to that 214-year tradition.
This makes me wonder, though, was this kind of obstruction always just one side doing it? How did majorities in the past handle nominees from the other party they really didn't like?
That's a great question, and if we connect it to the bigger picture, yeah, there's a contrast. Think back to President Clinton's administration. Republicans held the Senate majority then, and Clinton had some controversial nominees like Marcia Berzon, Richard Paez, strong opposition from conservatives.
So what happened? Did the GOP block them?
No. Republican leaders back then, including Senator Trent Lott, actually argued against filibustering judges. They ensured those nominees got their up or down vote, even though many Republicans voted no.
Interesting. So they disagreed, sometimes strongly, but let the vote happen.
Exactly. It shows a kind of historical restraint, prioritizing the government's ability to function over using procedural tactics to block everything. They let the process work, and a decision was made.
Okay, so it's clear these confirmation battles can really tie up an administration. But Washington keeps moving, right? While these fights were happening in the Senate, the Trump administration was pursuing other big policy changes too.
Let's shift focus a bit. What else was going on around, say, April 2019?
Yeah, definitely. Looking back at that period, you see a real focus on border security and economic policy, two big priorities. On immigration, for example, the president moved to reshape asylum law, gave officials 90 days to write new, tougher regulations for asylum seekers.
This was around the time Kirstjen Nielsen left Homeland Security.
Right. She was replaced by Kevin McAleenan as acting secretary. And the stated goal was to address what the administration called the surge of migrants along the southern border, tightening the rules on who could claim asylum. So using executive action, regulatory changes, maybe because getting new legislation through a divided Congress was tough. Makes sense. And what about the economy? That was a big focus, too.
Absolutely. The 2017 tax bill was still a major factor. Remember, that bill expanded corporate tax breaks, cut the corporate income tax rate significantly. Now, you had critics like Senator Bernie Sanders saying, look, Amazon, Netflix, paying nothing in federal taxes. That's a disgrace.
Right. That got a lot of attention.
It did. But from the conservative viewpoint, as presented in our sources, those tax cuts were designed to stimulate the economy, to encourage businesses to invest, create jobs. So from that perspective, companies using legal provisions in the tax code to reduce their tax burden wasn't a disgrace. It was the intended effect of incentivizing growth and investment. Just different philosophies on how the economy works best.
Okay. And besides policy, there was also still ongoing political scrutiny, investigations.
Oh, for sure. Partisan scrutiny continued. Take Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater. The House Intelligence Committee, led by Democrats at the time, made a criminal referral to the Justice Department about him.
What was the accusation?
They accused Prince of knowingly and willfully lying to Congress about a meeting he had back in January 2017. It was in the Seychelles, with a Russian banker who reportedly had ties to the Kremlin. The committee framed it as Prince hindering their investigation into Russia's attempts to contact and influence the incoming Trump administration. So yeah, those political battles, investigations, they were definitely still simmering.
Right. So we see action on the border, on taxes, these ongoing investigations, an administration governing in various ways, even with confirmation fights happening.
Yeah.
But let's bring it back home. All this political maneuvering, the confirmation gridlock we started with, how does that ultimately affect you, the listener, the average citizen?
Well, it has a real impact. When key government jobs, judges interpreting laws, cabinet secretaries running huge agencies sit empty for months or even years because of obstruction, it directly hits the government's ability to just do the people's business. It's not just abstract politics.
Give us an example.
Okay, think about critical legislation. An energy bill affecting your power costs. A highway project for your commute. Disaster relief funding after a hurricane or wildfire. All of that can get slowed down, even blocked, because the key people aren't in place, or because the Senate is tied up in these confirmation battles. Or think about the courts. When a judicial seat is vacant for years, it creates backlogs. Cases pile up. That could be environmental rules not being enforced, business disputes dragging on. It slows down justice for everyone. So yeah, it raises that big question. When these partisan fights over process start overshadowing the actual needs of the country, are we really being served effectively? Government needs to be able to debate, yes, but also to decide and act.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, it really suggests the health of our institutions, long-term, depends on finding that balance. A commitment to making government work, not just constant political fighting.
Absolutely. The design intended checks and balances, sure, but also the ability to govern and make progress. Which leads to a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to consider. When the Senate allows partisan obstruction to consistently block simple up or down votes on qualified people, what does that really signal about the future of our representative government? How does it affect the effective administration of justice for you? And maybe more fundamentally, how does it impact your trust and confidence in our democratic processes and in our leaders' ability to actually tackle the big challenges we face as a nation? Something to think about.